Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. As you said, I'm Dr. Maurer. I'm the Assistant Dean for Admissions at the College of Human Medicine at Michigan State University in East Lansing in Grand Rapids. I'm also a member of the LGBT community, and as such, I guess I have to fess up, I have my own personal biases a bit when it comes to the admissions process for people who identify with this community and or are allies to this community. And so I wanted to put together a bit of a presentation to try to offer some insight for those who are applicants to medical school who identify with this community, and potentially also their allies and their pre-health providers to help mentor and guide them through this challenging process. Over the first half of this presentation, I am going to address some generalities that I think are important in the admissions process, and then the second half provide hopefully some information about applying as an LGBT candidate and offer my own, what I would consider my own expert insights into the concept of disclosure of that information in the admissions process. So first, as I said, the first part of this presentation, I hope to present what I would consider just some basic criteria in which medical schools use to typically evaluate their medical school candidates, give a little bit of some insight as well as how to figure out where to apply, and then discuss some advantages and disadvantages of applying out as a pre-med applicant. So, you know, there's a movement in this country amongst many medical schools, I don't want to speak for all, but amongst many medical schools to use a bit more of a holistic approach as they are evaluating their candidates for medical school. And in order to do that, they generally will look at candidates with regards to three sort of categories of metrics. Clearly, there's the academic metric portion of being a solid candidate for medical school, but committees want to see more than that. They want to be able to see that a candidate has developed the activities background that support a potential career and a decision to go into medicine. And then through those activities, in the written application and then in the subsequent interviews, talk about and discover what are the personal characteristics of that candidate that we think are going to be consistent with providing the kind of doctor we hope to graduate from our medical school. So three general categories of things that committees are starting to focus on and consider in an equal manner. So let's start with the academics, okay? I like to talk about this first just because it seems like people and pre-meds tend to focus all their time and energies on this whole GPA and MCAT score thing, and so we'll just go ahead and get that taken care of up front. Admissions committees will look at grade point averages in a variety of manners when they are evaluating their candidates. Clearly there's an overall GPA, there's also what was the GPA in the science classes. They might look at the trend in the GPA. Okay, did someone really struggle the first year or two in college, but now they've got their act together and they've been able to assimilate into their college life, and as such, their grades recovered, and now they actually have demonstrated that they should be successful in a rigorous medical curriculum. Not everybody who goes through college, though, has had that fortunate ability to demonstrate that, and so maybe they've done some post-baccalaureate work, they've gone to do some graduate work in the sciences that now demonstrate that they can do this. And so there's lots of ways in which committees will look at GPA and try to figure out, does this individual have the academic chops now to to get through this rigorous curriculum. Another piece of the academic puzzle, clearly, is the MCAT score. It's the only way that medical schools have to really try to standardize the academic metric amongst all applicants. And so as such, it remains an important part of the admissions process for the vast majority of medical schools here in the United States. As a quick review, the current MCAT is a 3-section score that is reported to us with regards to biological, physical, and verbal reasoning categories with a score of 1 to 15, and with 15 being the best. And so, you know, we hope that candidates will do the best they can to demonstrate strong scores in the MCAT. Just as a side note, there is a new MCAT that's coming out in the year 2015 that's going to sort of reorganize the MCAT into different categories that will look a bit different than what they look like now, and actually add a behavioral and social science component to that MCAT test. So just some things to think about if you are in fact a pre-med applicant down the road, or an advisor to someone down the road. Please keep in mind that your academic preparation may involve having to prepare for a new format of the MCAT in a couple years. So what do we know about academics and future success in medical school? Well, if you look at all the candidates who've gotten into medical school that have an overall GPA of 3.0 to 3.19, and they just so happen to have an MCAT score, a total MCAT score in a 24 to 26 range, when they sit in on their step 1 of their licensing exam, typically taken at the end of their second year of medical school, 85% of these candidates will actually pass that exam on the first try, okay? And I took that exam a long, long time ago, and it's not an easy exam. So I think this is really interesting that, you know, people who have what most would consider fairly modest academic metrics with regards to the highly competitive pool of candidates who want to go to medical school, if they get in, they tend to do pretty well. And if they didn't, at least with regards to their standardized first step of the national licensing exam, and if they didn't pass it the first time, they virtually almost all will the second time that they take it. Same thing for the second part of that licensing exam that most will take before they graduate from medical school. Same academic demographic of candidate. The first time they take that step 2 exam, 90% of them will pass on the first try, with, again, virtually almost all passing on subsequent tries. So, you know, what are my take-home pieces of advice with regards to academics? Well, you know, even though I just showed you that you don't have to be the smartest person in the world to get through a rigorous academic curriculum and be successful at it, the competition is still really stiff, okay? We still have a lot of extremely academically qualified candidates to get into medical school, and there are so many more of them than what we have spots to train. We know that there's really no absolute GPA minimal cutoff that schools can agree on. Same thing about the MCAT score. So as I say, unofficially, from this particular dean's perspective, I would advise candidates to do their best to try to aim for a total GPA of a 3.4 and a science GPA of a 3.5. Again, that's an aim. I'm not saying that that's a minimal cutoff. But do your best to try to aim for those types of grades while you are preparing your application for medical school. With regards to the MCAT, aim for a score of a 28. Again, it doesn't have to be a 28 to get in. Clearly, we see that those candidates who do get in with MCAT scores lower than that can be very successful. But aim for that. Try not to get an individual score less than an 8. Sometimes a score less than an 8 will has the potential of raising a bit of a red flag to some admissions committees that might have concern about how well that student might perform in their own individual curriculum. So So do the best to aim for 8s and an overall of 28, okay? Clearly, if you don't meet those types of academic metric standards, again, that doesn't mean you're not going to be considered by medical schools. There may be other supportive things in your application that admissions committees are just going to like totally fall in love with you about, and they'll say, you know what, I'm okay with the fact that this person had a 3.2 science GPA and a 26 on their MCAT, because I know based on everything else that he or she's going to be a killer physician for a needy community someday. So just know, though, that you're going to have to probably demonstrate some strength in some other areas in order to get continued consideration by most admissions committees. Moving on to activities. So what sort of activities do I need to consider in support of a career in medicine? You know, I'll spend a little bit of time just on those top 2, more so than any of the others. You know, clearly the clinical activities have to be robust in nature. Admissions committees want to make sure that their candidates have actually tested the waters a bit and have watched and observed and worked with medical communities enough such that they feel comfortable that the candidate is confident in his or herself in the decision that they've made to pursue a career in medicine. Above that, though, I would like to emphasize, too, that I'm seeing a lot of evidence from admissions committees paying some close attention to community service activities that are non-medically related. And I think the thing about that, and that we're seeing with admissions committees, has to do with this idea, well, you know, I volunteered in the hospital all this time and gave all this volunteering time and commitment to helping out at the clinic, you know, every Friday afternoon. A lot of times admissions committees look at those activities as necessary but also very self-serving. And so sometimes it's hard for admissions committees to get an idea of what the personal character of that candidate is as they've volunteered in some of those clinical activities. So I think where committees feel more comfortable in trying to assess some of these important characteristics of becoming a physician in this generation has to do with what are they doing in their volunteer work outside of medicine. So for example, have they spent a lot of time you know, this last semester every Sunday from 11 till 1 volunteering their time in the soup kitchen downtown? Are they involved with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Habitat for Humanity? Have they spent some time doing Teach for America, Peace Corps, those sorts of things? Those are the sorts of activities that I think really speak to an admissions committee about what's in a candidate's heart and what some of the true character is of a candidate as a future caregiver for underserved communities in this country and beyond. And so I would want to make sure that through this presentation that I emphasize what I think are really, really important for a lot of medical schools these days, is this idea of, yes, you have to have enough clinical exposures, but you also have to have this kinds of activities that really demonstrate your personal character and what's in your heart. And that non-medically related community service is where you can really excel and be able to do that. Oops. Oop. There we go. A few more things that I usually bring up when I give talks like this about the activities. Committees usually look a little bit more favorably on long-term committee or community service type experiences. So like I said, some of those things, Habitat for Humanity, Big Brother, Big Sister, things that you're showing a real strong commitment to, again, speaks loudly about who you are. They're a little bit more favorable as opposed to isolated short-term activities that might be a day or less than a month in length. And so, again, gives us a better idea of your character. Activities of purpose are usually viewed as more favorable than activities of hobby. That doesn't mean that we don't want to hear that you're an accomplished pianist or that you have this really interesting side of you of rock climbing and that sort of thing. But I'm not sure that that's what the focus of a medical school application is about. And so just make sure that when you think about those activities that you want to put forth on an application, that they are viewed as activities that are in support of a future career in medicine. I usually also tell people to do the best they can to try to avoid, if possible, inclusion of activities that occurred in high school, with a bit of a caveat. That is, unless they were really extremely meaningful in your preparation and decision to attend medical school, and or these were activities that you then continued through your college career and beyond, okay? If those are the kinds of activities that were really meaningful to you, then absolutely then talk about them. But if it was high school activities and it ended once you were done in high school, I think the chances of that being a meaningful experience tends to fall lower in the eyes of an admissions committee. So just, again, some things to think about. Moving on to characteristics that committees are starting to look at in a more robust manner. I mean, clearly, we want doctors who are going to be compassionate, culturally sensitive, have ethical awareness and self-awareness, are good communicators, that are mature. They know, even though they may be leaders, we want to make sure they play well in the nice in the sandbox with each other. And so are they good teamwork players as well? Are they honest individuals? Do they possess characteristics of social and professional responsibility? Okay, there's lots of ways in which a candidate can work on communicating to committees these sides of them that are going to allow them to be effective physicians in this generation. You know, one of the ways that you're going to be able, and perhaps in many ways the best way that you're going to be able to demonstrate your personal characteristics, is going to be how you communicate to schools during an interview. So you got an interview, maybe that school uses a lot of standardized questions that actually pose situations to you, and they want to see how do you react. Are you sympathetic to that problem? Do you understand that it's a complex issue? But are you willing to take a stance and provide evidence of support for that? So the interview really does allow people to get a sense of the personal characteristic that comes with the applicant. But you know, you can also be very effective in describing character in your personal statement, in the written application, the supplemental materials that you send in, how you describe those activities in that written application. You know, how you address failure. Okay, sometimes I know applicants are a little reluctant to talk about that, but you know, medical schools are looking for candidates that have great self-awareness. So do you know what you're good at, and do you know what you're not good at? And even though you've tried to make that better, you just know that you really aren't going to ever be very good at that. That's important to medical schools, because they want to put out physicians who understand what they're not good at, so that when they're faced with those situations, they know that that person's going to call for help, okay? And bring people along who are good at some of those things. So knowing what you're not good at is going to keep you out of trouble someday, and medical schools and admissions committees appreciate that. You know, how do you demonstrate your willingness to step outside your comfort zone, and what sort of life experiences? Again, those are all ways in which you can help communicate your character to medical schools and to the committees that serve them. Moving on a little bit to how do I figure out where to apply to medical school? Again, these tend to have some more general principles, but then we can kind of then tailor that here to the LGBT community here in just a bit. But I always tell people, regardless of their background, you know, you always want to look at your home state schools first, because we know that from a statistical point of view, that is going to be your best chance of getting into medical school, is getting into your home state school's medical school. We know California is a little tricky, because I think from our experiences of a non-California medical school, we understand and realize that there are so many extremely well-qualified candidates that come from the state of California that not everybody can be accommodated by the schools that exist here. So, you know, places like us, we're thrilled with that, because we love the California applicants. We want you to apply to us because we think you offer something to us that helps make us have a robust and diverse class that we may not otherwise have. There are other states that have other issues too, though, because some of these states don't have medical schools at all. Places like Maine, Delaware, Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, none of them have medical schools. So if you're a candidate that resides in one of those states, again, that may be a little bit more tricky to navigate and hopefully be able to get into medical schools that have cooperative agreements with your states, and or be able to sell yourself as a candidate that has that resonates well with schools outside those regions. I would say when you're deciding where to apply to medical school, one of the things you may want to pay close attention to is what that medical school's mission is, okay? Take a look at the mission. A lot of medical schools have fairly generic missions. Others are not very generic, okay, and are very explicit in the types of physicians that they are trying to graduate and serve the communities, okay? Is it a school that focuses primarily on primary care, specialty care, or both? Is it a school that makes a point of stating in their mission statement that they promote the dignity and inclusion of all people and respond to the needs of the medically underserved? That's from my mission statement at Michigan State. I think that's a really unique thing that actually is explicitly said in a mission statement, and one that I'm very proud of. And so, take a look at mission statements from other medical schools, because if there's something that resonates with you in that mission statement, that might be a clue to you that you may want to think about researching that school a little bit more. And if that school has programming, again, that support that desire of what you want to accomplish someday, that's even better then, because then you know, hey, this may be the right school for me. Even though it's a school outside of California or the West Coast, this is a school that may be a good fit for me. So moving on a little bit more here to the application process and being LGBT. So, what is it that we know about the application process to medical school and pre-meds who self-identify with this community or allies within this community? Well, we really know nothing, because the truth of the matter is we're not asking the questions consistently. I'm not aware of any medical schools, and I could be wrong, but I'm not aware of any medical schools that are asking for additional demographic information from their candidates on secondary applications as it refers to how one identifies with regards to sexual identity or sexual orientation. So it's hard. We don't know much about people who identify in these communities and are trying to answer that question of should I apply out or not. Well, I take that back a little bit. It's mostly nothing that we know. There was an abstract that came out about 8 years ago, in which a researcher polled a small number of current medical students at that time. The vast majority were from New York, and then a much smaller number from San Francisco. But there were a total of 60 medical students and doctors that were surveyed in this study. 95% of them did not disclose their orientation on their application. And of those who didn't disclose, over half thought it wasn't relevant. I guess that kind of saddened me a little bit when I saw that in that study, because as someone who does identify with that community, I think it can be relevant, and in many ways is relevant to telling the story of who you are and how it became that you decided to pursue a career of service and in medicine. But in this particular survey, over half who chose not to disclose didn't think it was important, okay? There were a certain number that were uncomfortable with revealing that information, and I think for those of us who identify as members of this community, we can relate to that. It's not always comfortable talking about that part of who you are with an audience that might be a complete stranger, okay? 15% were concerned that they were actually going to be discriminated against. and that they would not get accepted to medical school if they were to self-disclose as a member of this community. So then it brings to the question, so what are you going to do? You know, you identify with this community, and it's a big part of who you are, and it's part of the story of who you are. So what are we going to do? Well, that's a great question, and I think the best that we can offer right now are perspectives of people like myself who play roles in the admissions, in medical school admissions. And so I would offer the following as what I would consider as expert opinion and expert advice. I think with regards to being LGBT and being out in your application, there's a couple things that you have to think about. I think you have to know about or think strongly about what are your priorities and goals in getting accepted to medical school. And then secondly, make sure you put forth the best application possible. Again, talking about some of those things that we talked about earlier, and making sure that you've got the best application that you can. But let's talk just a little bit about these priorities. Well, what do I mean by know what your priorities? Well, you know, if your foremost goal is to get into medical school, and if for some reason you are truly concerned that being out on your application is going to somehow negatively impact that goal of getting accepted into medical school, then you know, being out on your application may be too much of a risk for you, okay? And I think that, again, that's a personal decision that those who are in that community will have to make. You know, do you really believe, even though we have no data to argue otherwise, if you really believe that that's going to be a harmful thing, then you may not be able to do that. If, however, though, you have also no interest in attending a medical school that won't accept you in the skin that you have, and your comfort as being an out member of an LGBT community, then being out on your application might be kind of a nice way to screen for that, okay? If there's a medical school that doesn't want you because of that, why would you want to go to school there? Okay? I don't think that there are very many medical schools out there that are in fact like that. In fact, I'd be really surprised to hear if there were a lot of medical schools that were like that. But you know, if there are any, being out on your application is probably a really good way to make sure you don't get into some of those schools that you will most likely not be very happy at anyway. I think, you know, another thing that you have to ask yourself as someone in this community is how comfortable are you in your skin as an LGBT person? You know, I think as someone who's in this community, being out on that application process does provide you an ability to project your pride and comfort as being an LGBT member. I think the more comfortable you are as someone in that community, the more confident you're going to come across in your interview, and to be able to talk about yourself and tell your story. You know, if on the other hand, you're at a point in your life where that comfort is still questionable at times, and you're really not comfortable disclosing your identity, then you know, the application process may not be the time to test those waters. Okay. It's a big deal. We all know that the spots for medical schools are highly coveted, and you need to be able to put forth your best effort to get one of those spots. And if, you know, if you're not comfortable in your skin to talk about this, then, you know, this may not be the best time to try to disclose. Having said all that, I think that there are a lot of positives, though, about considering applying out on your application. I think a lot of medical schools these days are looking for candidates that will provide unique characteristics to their class and add to the diversity of a student body. So many medical schools have what I would consider a hidden curriculum, in the sense that they know that if they can bring together groups of people with various life experiences and differences, that they're going to learn from each other over the course of the following 4 to 5 years of medical school. And so if you are someone who's comfortable talking about this, this is a way that you're going to be able to use being a member of this community to your advantage. I think that, that most people, or many people within the LGBT community, have a lot to say about personal growth and what they've learned from the process of understanding who they are. And as such, you've got a great story to tell. And you know, as such, I would argue that if that story played a big role as to why it is you've decided to pursue a career in medicine, I would encourage you to be brave and tell that story, particularly as it relates to your decision to go to medical school. I think that being LGBT in medicine is in fact relevant, and if not, it at least has the potential to be relevant, and as such, it allows for you to discuss how you will hopefully approach the care of patients someday. You know, maybe you've seen other people within the community discriminated against and treated poorly. Maybe you've experienced that personally yourself, and you know that that's never how you would ever want to treat someone, especially someone who's sick and not feeling well or has a chronic disease process. These are people who are hurting and are wanting compassionate, caring medical care. You know, your experiences as a member of that community have the potential to play an important part of telling the story of the kind of doctor that you're going to be someday. And so as such, I would encourage you to think about telling that story on your application. I usually also like to warn some people, though, you don't want to completely overdo the whole LGBT idea on your application. I think, you know, it's one component that makes you unique, but you know, being unique is multidimensional, and there's lots of things about you as an applicant that are unique. You know, being LGBT is one thing, but don't be afraid to talk about some of the other things that make you an extremely unique and attractive candidate, and relate these aspects of uniqueness to medicine, how they led you to this career choice, and how you anticipate they will impact your approach to patient care. So you've now presented your best foot and application on paper, and the admissions committee loves what they see, and they invite you to an interview. Now you're at a point where it's like, okay, I want to try to figure out, you know, if I'm going to actually go visit this school as a potential candidate, is this a place where I think I can be happy, okay? And so, you know, the formal interview in of itself has the potential of being difficult to raise some of these questions, because you may not have the open-ended opportunities, okay? There are lots of schools, especially out here in California, and including mine in Michigan, though, that use the multiple mini interview as a process of interviewing. And it's a really highly structured interview process that doesn't allow people to necessarily contribute to their own interview in an agenda that you as a candidate might want to pursue a line of questioning. And so how are you going to help, you know, work to try to find out some of those things? Well, you know, look for parts of that interview day in which the formality is low, okay? A lot of times medical schools will have experiences through certain aspects of the day in which you don't have to be 100% on in the interview, and they will provide you opportunities to meet others who are at the medical school and have candid conversations with them. Maybe it's over lunch, okay? So on interview day, you're provided a lunch, and they bring a lot of medical students who attend medical school at that institution to come sit with you and talk to you about life at their medical school. That's an awesome time to start an inquiry of, is this a very LGBT-friendly campus? Do the students express support and sympathy to people who are within that community? Don't hesitate if you know that you're going to have an interview contact the admissions office before you show up. I've had that happen many times where an LGBT candidate knows that they're going to come interview at my medical school, and they'll contact us a couple weeks ahead of time and saying, hey, it would be really, really nice if I could meet some other LGBT students at your school. Is it possible if I were to show up a day or two ahead of time for that interview? Would you be able to make arrangements for me to have dinner with some or to gather so I can just ask a few questions? I would be surprised if medical school admissions committees would not help to try to work to make that happen. Again, they've invited you to come interview you. So, at some level, they want you to come to school here. So they're trying to put their best foot forward as well. So don't be afraid to ask admissions offices for opportunities for you to inquire about LGBT issues that are going on at those individual institutions. So, and with that, that is all I have to present as far as my own personal expert advice and opinion. I'm happy to take any questions, though, from the audience. Or if afterwards, if you're not comfortable in the public forum, I'm happy to answer any further questions off the podium. So thank you very much. Yes?
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment.
Okay.
I feel like if I was an admissions director, I would look really positively on an applicant that was out, only because I feel like growing up in the 80s and 90s as an LGBT member,
Yeah.
it was a lot more difficult of a time than it is. I mean, if you were born now, it's going to be easier in that community because it's
Right.
more accepted than it was growing up in the early 90s and 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, again, I kind the question has to do with, or the comment has to do with sort of why wouldn't the candidate feel comfortable at this point? Yeah.
There's still discrimination.
Right, but it's an easier time now. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in my formative adolescent years in the late 70s and into the 80s, and that was a really horrible time in this community to live and experience life. And so, in the previous two sessions in which I gave this talk, I said, I think the timing is right for this to be seen as a positive thing. And, I think it's easy for me because I identify with this community. Sure, I'm looking for people who are willing and brave enough to tell their story about who they are and how it applies to medicine. And I see that as a really positive thing. I would hope that other admissions directors and deans would see that as a positive thing as well. I think that they probably will. But again, there's just, I think that there's a lot of fear that still exists because, again, we're not asking the questions. And so, one of the things that I'm in the process of developing, at least in my own mind, and if not actually following through on, because I am in academic medicine, is, I need to ask these questions of admissions offices or admissions directors and deans at other universities and come up with questions and say, and just flat out ask them, is this going to hurt an applicant if they at your medical school if they are out? And I hope I'm not disappointingly surprised by the answer. I think that I agree. I think it's a different time than what it was like 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And I think the time is prime right now for people to be brave and tell their story and tell it with genuineness, and not be afraid of this anymore. So I hope you're right. I hope that they are.
Just like people look for, I feel like admissions directors look for people who have overcome adversity.
Absolutely.
And that's such a big adversity to overcome.
Mm-hmm. And hate crimes, and absolutely, yeah. So again, yeah. So if you've experienced some of that stuff in your life and overcome that kind of adversity, tell us that story, okay? Because I think many people in admissions do think it's relevant as to being a future compassionate, caring, and sensitive physician. So yes. Yeah. There's nothing, that's just it. There's really nothing out there that is asking this question and researching this question. It's a wide open field right now. So yeah, I don't. Organizations within medicine that are supportive to the LGBT community, so the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association and some of the work that's done in AMSA. They have resources to kind of help address some of these questions, but they've not really been put forth in a formal research sort of perspective. I know that there are some medical schools that in their own websites have put together their own schools, what they call outlist, that helps identify individual members within their medical school communities that are comfortable in their LGBT skin and aren't afraid to have that be public knowledge, so that they can then serve as resource for others that are hopefully within the same institution to reach out towards for support. So we're seeing a bit more of that kind of movement going on, but again, right now we're not at a point where we're asking important scholarly questions about this, and I'm hoping within the next few years I can be a part of changing that. So yeah. I'm sorry, do I have trouble? Within my own application? No, because I was not out then. Okay, I was a late bloomer. I didn't figure it out until I was a first year of medical school. Although everybody around me knew I was gay, I didn't. Okay, which is what? Absolutely. Well, I think again, it's partial. It gets back to some other things I talked about in some of my previous talks. I think denial is a very powerful emotion. And, for me in that time growing up, it wasn't something that I was allowing myself to consider to be a reality for me. So at the time when I applied to medical school, it was a non-issue because it had nothing to do with how I was thinking at the time. And then all of a sudden I had a revelation. So, and the rest is history. So, yeah. So, all right. Thank you.